Can you be trans and religious? Well, that often leads to trans people having to square their own faith with being religious. What do I believe now? Well, I think it might frustrate a lot of you to hear, hi everyone, snow joke today, snow here, snow everywhere, but this is probably my favourite kind of winter weather, so I'm quite happy, even though it's a bit chilly. I'm more than happy to share this little winter adventure with everybody. Normally when I tackle these sorts of controversial topics, I feel a sort of trepidation as I start this conversation because I know how much emotion is caught up in them, and so I know that there's going to be a sort of a fraughtness, a triggering, if you will, of emotions on all different ends of the spectrum. But this time I'm feeling a little bit more chilled, a bit more at peace with this video. I don't know, maybe it's the weather, this blanket of snow perhaps blanketing my potential anxieties about what I'm about to say, but I think also I'm quite confident with what I'm going to say. I think the conclusions that I've made, I don't think everyone's going to agree with them, by the way. I know that you're going to find a lot of fault in the things that I'll say, but I'm at peace with that. I think what I have to say is true for me, and that's what I'm saying. I'm talking about my truth. Oh, I hate that phrase, but it's true. That's what I'm going to be talking about here. So I suppose if I'm going to talk about transgender issues in religion, maybe I should start off by talking about myself and my own little journey when it comes to religion, because I don't really want to do that sort of bait and switch move where I'll be like, can I tell you what I think later on? I'm going to start up front and be quite clear about where I'm coming from. I think that's a much more intellectually honest way of starting this conversation. My glove keeps getting in the way of the camera, it's very annoying. So as many of you probably know, I was born in London in the UK, and I was raised in the Church of England. My parents were very religious, my dad still is, and so I grew up learning all about the teachings of Jesus and the Old Testament, the New Testament. I know all of the stories, I know all of the underpinnings of the belief of Christianity, but I also grew up in a part of London which was incredibly multicultural, and I see this as a key part of my learning. I was also exposed to Sikhism, Buddhism, Islam, Zoroastrianism, Rastafarianism, paganism. All sorts of different beliefs formed parts of the lives of those around me, and it was interesting to see how Christianity wasn't the only religion, and it wasn't the one true religion that it sometimes espoused to be. I was curious by the way that other people worshipped and thought about themselves and the world around them, and the way that their religion framed and guided that perception. And it was interesting to see how they were slightly different, but often overlapping as well. Regardless of the differences in religions, there was always that sort of commonality of humanity that brought us together. The shared love of food and family, for example. Anyway, I digress there, but I think I've been really lucky insofar that I've been raised religious, but also I have that broad understanding of what it means to be not what I was raised as, which I guess is kind of appropriate given my current status. So anyway, what do I believe now? Well, I think it might frustrate a lot of you to hear that I feel I'm probably agnostic when it comes to how I perceive religion. I don't really have a strong belief in a God. There are certain ideas and philosophies that I'm drawn to, for example, that of reincarnation or rebirth from the Buddhist philosophies, that idea of it being more of a spiritual pursuit rather than a worshipping of deities, although I think Buddha's probably become something of a deity in Buddhism. I certainly don't subscribe to this sort of spiritual justice that most religions have underpinning their ethical code. I don't think that there's going to be some kind of godly reckoning of the bad guys who do the bad things. And I think that sort of moral specificity, that moral certainty over so many thousands of years, it's not especially helpful when it comes to new and emerging ideas and philosophies and realities as we learn more about the human existence. I mean, obviously I'm talking about the trans experience here, but also think about things like women's rights and civil rights and other areas where people have strived to find equality. And oftentimes it's religion that has been the spearhead of resistance against it. And so that often leads to trans people having to square their own faith with being religious. And I often see on subreddits and other online spaces conversations about how can I be Christian and trans? How can I be a Muslim and trans? How can I be whatever and trans? And I think that's really sad because there's so many people who are suffering with this conflict. Can they be trans whilst everybody within their religion, or at least it's going to feel that way, is telling them that they are evil and are consigned to some kind of hell? So to be honest, and to be again upfront about what my response to this be, can you be trans and religious? Well, yeah, absolutely, I think you can. And I think my rationale for this boils down to a few ideas, a few arguments. They're my arguments, by the way. I don't think these are shared by everybody. And it comes down to the idea of why are people religious in the first case. And I think there's many reasons, but I'm going to kind of discuss a few and why some of those things are understandable and where I think the deeper philosophical conflict between religion and, say, trans people really comes into play. So the three things I'm going to touch on are a sense of community or a sense of belonging, a sense of spiritual peace, and a seek for a kind of understanding, especially when it comes to ethical and moral decisions. So to start off with, that notion of belonging, that's such a human need. We are a communal people. Yes, you get some people who seem to be more comfortable alone. You get people who are more energized in their solitude. But ultimately, we are always drawn back to being with one another. I think one of the biggest problems that COVID and the lockdowns created was that divisiveness, that solitude that it forced upon people. And I think a lot of people really struggled with that. Even though I would have said that I'm an introvert before I started transitioning, now I'm not so sure. I initially really enjoyed that peace that I got, but eventually I really missed just vibing with other people, and I really do enjoy going into the office, which is why I walk to work every single day. And I wouldn't give this up. If I had the choice, I would work from the office constantly. And I know that's not entirely popular. I know that some people prefer working from home, but it's not for me. And so I know a lot of people do find that community and support within religious groups, and it makes sense, because where else can you find a literal and metaphorical congregation of individuals? Especially as you grow older, you move away from school and university. Work can be, you're not always working with thousands of people like I am. So where else are you going to find that collectiveness, that being part of a group? But also being part of a religious group, it speaks to working towards something greater than you. And all of you there being drawn towards being in that place for that one purpose, singing the songs and repeating the catechisms. There's something really powerful there. And it's not just about spirituality, it's about that connectedness to other people. You can sit there in the pews rubbing shoulders with anybody. It could be a millionaire, it could be a pauper. And so I can completely understand that. And I think especially for trans and queer people, it can be such a solitary existence. It can be so lonely sometimes. And so feeling that you are part of a wider community, that's something that is incredibly appealing to anybody. Okay, so as for that need for a kind of a spiritual something, again, I can completely see the value there. Humans have been searching for the answers to why why is everything. Since the dawn of time, you can see pretty much every single religion and faith has some kind of story about the start of the universe and the world. And it's interesting because that story often talks about the kind of people that they were as well. And this is why I think there's definitely value in learning about these religions and reading those books as a source of learning, not necessarily because these are directly relevant in day-to-day living, but more because they formed such a fundamental underpinning of how we perceive ourselves and our connection to the world. To understand that will help us to understand some of the deeper psychologies of people. I know that's a very Jungian kind of way of looking at things, but it's absolutely true. And beyond that, there is something about wanting to feel at one with the universe, that connection to the world, to nature, to infinity itself. Atheism and science-based faiths seem to have a kind of clinical nihilism, I suppose, which takes away that sort of human need for that deeper connection. It's all science and data and facts, and sometimes feelings are equally important. Sometimes things just need to feel right. And I think sometimes you do get religious people trying to show their reasonings, their fact-based elements of faith, but I think it's a much more honest way to say it just feels right, I have faith, because that's ultimately what faith is. And I suppose you could say atheists are showing the same degree of faith in science as religious people are showing in their God. And I think there is a certain closed-mindedness within the atheist community in that sense, which is kind of funny. But that spiritual draw, I see the value in that, absolutely. And I suppose this is kind of my problem, because I do appreciate that, but I just can't vibe with the human element of religions. You know, like there's this argument that atheists and anti-religious folk often make, that look at all of the misery that religion has caused. I would argue that's not religion that's caused those things. It was people that caused those things. And if you look, I mean, I'm going to make a lot of references to the Bible because that's the book that I'm much more familiar with. But if you look within the Bible, there's so many conflicting moral directives within there. There's so many ways that you could interpret those words. It's up to us as people to decide how we interpret them. So I'll give you a little example of this. So one of the stories that really resonated with me when I was younger and learning about Christianity was the story of the Good Samaritan. And I'm not going to summarize that story. If you don't know what it is, go look it up. But basically, what that story was about was a person who was able to put his deep-seated cultural hatred towards a group when it came to taking care of an individual. This person, this Samaritan, was able to put aside what he'd heard about that group and was able to see that wounded, injured person, desperate in need, bleeding on the floor, and give them some treatment and help and support. And obviously, again, there's clear parallels. I think there's a clear message that I'm trying to send to my Christian viewers. But I can focus on this. I can focus on those messages of love and forgiveness in the Bible. But that's kind of overlooking all of the messages directing people of faith to essentially genocide people who do not follow that religion. And I'm choosing as a human to focus on this one lesson, this one teaching. Meanwhile, other people can disregard that lesson and focus on the genocidal maniac stuff. That's not a religious matter. That's a human choice. Which brings me to the third point about ethical and moral guidance. Now, I think for those of you who are paying attention to this video and the argument I was just making, you can probably see where I'm about to go with this. Now, first of all, I want to say if you're looking for some kind of external codex of morality to help you with some difficult decisions that you need to make in your life, that's fine. That's absolutely fine and understandable. Ethics is hard. Morality is hard. Making these decisions is hard. It's really difficult to know sometimes which way to go. Which is the right choice to make? Which is the right side of history? If you forgive me using that phrase. Where should I fall when the chips are down? And that can be really difficult for you to make as an individual, and sometimes you do need to call back to a kind of objective piece of guidance. And where else can we go but to our religious leaders, our religious texts, because that's one of the first and foremost things that they are there to do for us. It is the 10 Commandments, for example. So it's quite obvious that a lot of people will turn to those in times of need, in times of moral and ethical guidance. Now, as I've just said, it's incredibly easy to look for specific thoughts and ideas and arguments. And so I challenge people of faith, if you are indeed looking to the Bible for ethical or moral guidance, are you doing so from a position of genuine seekings of truths? Or are you doing so just to find justifications for your already pre-held beliefs? Because that's a completely different thing. That's not ethical guidance. That's ethical justifications for things that you already feel. How many times have you turned to the Bible worried that maybe your hatred of another is somehow not the right thing, and then to somehow land on a passage obscure and oblique, but still can be interpreted in a way to make you justify that hatred? However, how often do you turn to the story of the Good Samaritan and question your choices? How many times is it the former? How many times the latter? And I want to end with a little anecdote. I mean, I've talked about my dad before, so if you've seen that video, again, you'll know what I'm about to say. So he's said to me a few times that he's really had to question his own self in terms of his support for me, squaring what he feels his religion says about trans people and his love for me. He's had to struggle. It's been really difficult for him to come to these conclusions, and I really appreciate the conclusion that he made, because his love for me has outweighed that religious doctrine. Traps. And to me, that's what it should all be about. It should be difficult. It should be a struggle. Forgiveness should be a difficult thing for you to do, because that's kind of the point. It should be a way for you to look inside yourself and think, am I actually in the right here? And maybe you are, I don't know. But maybe you're not. And that process should be difficult. It shouldn't be something where you can just point to one passage in the Bible that can be interpreted as you should hate gay people and be done with it, because that's not good enough. And just to emphasize this, or to exemplify this a little bit, I'd like you to think about some famous religious leader or religious person springs to mind, your Jesuses of the world, and think, were they blind, subservient followers of a regime or of a large organization or collective? Or were they fiercely independent, fighting for what they believed in? I think if you look at religious people that we revere, that we look towards as the leaders and emblems of those religions, it's very rarely a case that it's a blind following of orders. I mean, Jesus himself was killed because he was so anti-establishment. So ask yourself, do you want to do what is right? Or do you want to just blindly follow orders? And I think that's the thing that makes me worry about religious followers, because you can be often led by your own human instincts and desires and thoughts, rather than to be led towards doing the hard thing, the difficult thing, the thing that maybe you've been told over and over again is the bad thing, but you can see on a human level that maybe it's not as bad as you're being told. Maybe I'm being a bit oblique here, I don't know. Anyway, I'll finish off there for this portion of the video, and now we'll pivot to myself giving you some more life updates and the comment of the week. See you later. Hi everyone, back at home again. So life updates time. I don't really have anything new to report about work, but oh wait one sec. I got myself these glasses, the darker ones. I hope that you think they are nice. I'm quite satisfied with them, and it's quite weird to see, especially my screens in clear resolution. Oh my god, do I actually look like that? Otherwise, what else have I been up to? Well, I've got my face lasered on Friday, so you might notice again, as before, I've got a bit of a darkening on my around my mouth, which is always very frustrating. It's super painful, but as I think I said last time, I do quite appreciate the pain because it makes me feel like it's working. Wait, you can see the reflection of my setup in my glasses. That's wild. I'm going to take these off. So that was Friday. On Saturday, which is actually yesterday, Carolina and I went to see The Brutalist. I think we're expecting quite a big blockbustery Oscar type movie, and I have to say, visually it's really quite remarkable, and the scale that I think it's going for is quite grand. But I think we were both quite disappointed with the actual result. We felt the characters were a bit flat, didn't quite connect with us emotionally, and I think we were very disappointed because the main character doesn't actually exist. We looked up a Laszlo top, and it turns out that this was some person who tried to destroy a piece of art. What was it? Michelangelo's something or other. And so that seemed like a much more interesting story than the one that we got. So obviously, if you liked it, that's fantastic. I'm really happy for you, but we just didn't really connect with it. We have been watching White Lotus though, and that's really good. So if you're looking for something to binge watch, go check out White Lotus if you haven't already done so. As for my comment of the week, so this week I've actually got quite a few really good, interesting, meaningful comments, and actually some of them led to the video that I made today about religion, because I thought that there were some comments that prompted me to have this conversation. And actually there's another one that somebody made around about the overreach of trans rights campaigners, and I actually would like to make a longer form video about that. So that was really interesting comments. This one was by the Mary Trulive. So I'm going to get to that one in a bit, but the one that I'm going to mention here is from Dada Awesome 784, who asks, is it transphobic to not subscribe to gender ideology? And this is a common kind of expression that you'll see bandied about transgender folk and gender, and it being a gender ideology, some kind of ideology. And I think I'm quite proud of the response that I gave to this question. I'm actually going to read it out because I quite like it. Calling me sir or Mr. in error or mistaking me for a man, I don't see that as inherently transphobic. I know how I look. I'm not blind or an idiot. I know some people in my life might find it tough to take that transition, and it's fine. Sometimes it can sting a little, and it's nothing I'll get upset with that other person about. I like to think I'm quicker to understand than to anger. Treating me like a man, whatever that means, is also whatever. Calling being transgender an ideology, well, is being black, white or other racial ideology? Is being gay or straight or bi sexual preference ideology? Is being tall or short or skinny or overweight body shape identity? Is having ADHD or autism also a neurodivergent identity? Is being vision or hearing impaired ability ideology? Is being depressed or bipolar mental health ideology? And what happens if people don't agree with any of those things above? Would that be seen as a neutral or unbiased position? If I were to say I don't agree with black or with gay people, I hope that you would agree that sounds a bit bad, no? A bit prejudiced? One can disagree with someone's religious or political beliefs or position because to a certain extent they've chosen to take and retain them. There are clear points of reference and arguments that one can make to have a healthy and sadly sometimes unhealthy conversation there. You're not a Christian or Democrat or whatever at birth, or have the potential to demonstrate conservative values from genetics or through an imbalance of hormones or whatnot. But ultimately it is possible to logic one's way into and out of those beliefs. In other words, your political and religious and moral positions are an ideology. The phrase gender ideology is a loaded term and suggests a bias, an ideology in of itself, if you will. I don't believe I'm transgender. I am transgender. Many of us wish we weren't, but here we are. We have no choice. This is not like being a Catholic where we can just leave if we wish. We can't just move across the aisle and shift from blue to red, as much as many of us would like to. Your gender, cis or trans or non-binary or intersex, is not an ideology. I suppose you're welcome to disagree with me in the same way you can disagree that gay people or trees exist, but it's just plain wrong, I'm afraid. So that was my response to that, and I'm actually quite happy with how that went. And I don't know, I mean, feel free to agree or disagree with that, but I think that's quite good. One more thing that I would like to update you all on, I actually do put in quite a lot of effort into these. And I've never really asked for any kind of financial support. I don't have a Patreon or anything like that. If you do like what I do, and if you do think that you would like to do something nice for me, I don't know. I'm not saying that you have to by any stretch of the imaginations, but I'm going to put my little buy me a coffee thing here. And if you do feel that you'd like to support me just a little bit, just a tiny amount, I would really appreciate if you were to buy me a coffee, because I do love my coffee. Anyway, thank you very much for your comments, for your suggestions. As you can see, a lot of the comments that I'm getting are very much informing what I'm putting into my content. So if you do want me to talk about something on these videos, just drop me a comment, drop me a line. And otherwise, I hope to see you all again very soon. And all the best. Take care. Goodbye.